So today we're going to make a sugar wash. A sugar wash is probably the easiest recipe you can make. You really have to try to mess this recipe up. There's a couple things that we're going to need, and you're going to need something to ferment it in. This is a 7-gallon bucket. You're going to probably want at least a 6-gallon bucket to do it in. 6 gallons should be fine. This is a 7. I've never had a problem with a 7-gallon overflowing with a sugar wash. But 6 you should be fine as well. We need sugar. You're going to need at least 1 pound of sugar per gallon of water. Ideally, you're going to want at least 1.5 pounds. I'm going to use a 10-pound bag of sugar for a couple reasons. Number one, I'm lazy and I don't have to measure it out if I use a full 10-pound bag. Number two, a 10-pound bag and 5 pounds and 5 gallons of water gives me a starting gravity of around 1092. So it's going to produce a decent amount of alcohol. And I've made that enough times that I know about what I'm going to get out of it. You're going to need some water. I'm going to use 5 gallons of the spring water. You can use whatever water you want. Use tap water if you want. Like I said, any water. Well water, if you've got it, should work just fine. You're going to need a yeast. I am going to use this Distillimax RM. This is made by Distillimax. It is a daddy yeast, a distiller's active dry yeast. But it's made specifically for sugars. You can use whatever daddy yeast you want. All right, don't get wrapped around the axle about trying to find that yeast and use that. Use whatever daddy yeast you want. You're going to need a yeast nutrient. I'm going to use this Distillavite GN. This is their general nutrient. You don't have to buy the specific yeast nutrient. You can just use a small can of tomato paste will work just fine for you. You need a spoon to measure it with. 1 tablespoon of yeast, 2 tablespoons of the yeast nutrient, or 1 full small can of tomato paste. You're also going to need something to measure the temperature with. Just a small mechanical thermometer like that will work just fine. Since I have it, I'm going to use this Inkbird. Either one works just fine. Do not go out and buy an Inkbird thinking you've got to have it. Like I said, small mechanical works just fine. Use what you have. The only other thing we're going to need is a pot to heat the water in. I'm going to use an 8-gallon still to heat it in just because that's what I have available at the time. You can use a pot on the stove if you want. You can heat it over propane, however you want to heat it. Temperature wise, we're only going to heat the water to about 110. We do not have to boil this. Our only thing we have to do is melt sugar in the water. That's it. The hotter you get the water, the quicker the sugar is going to melt, but also the longer you're going to have to wait to pitch your yeast. So just keep that in mind. I find 110 degrees to be a pretty good balance. 110, 120, somewhere in there. Usually works pretty good for me. So I'm going to get this water into the still, and I'll pick back up in a minute. If you'd like to learn more about distilling, check out Distilling Tradition on MeWe. Distilling Tradition is a group of friends on MeWe that share information about distilling. You won't get yelled at for asking a question, and no one's going to make you wait 6 months after registering before you can post something. We have recipes, we have instructions, we have how-tos, and we have plenty of knowledgeable people ready to answer your questions. That's Distilling Tradition. Come join us. Alright, so what I have here, this is a small 8-gallon still, and I have the 5 gallons of water inside. I am going to use this little still to heat up my water. You can use whatever you want. A pot on the stove will work just as fine. If you're doing this outside, you can do this over propane, over a wood fire, whatever you want to do. This is electric, so this is the temperature in my basement, but it's not connected to the still at the moment, so it's going to continually read that. I'm going to turn it on for 100% power, and we're going to watch the temperature gauge right there until it gets up to about 100 to 110. You don't have to heat this really hot because we are just melting sugar. That's all you're doing is melting sugar, and then you're going to wait for the water to cool a little bit to pitch your yeast. And when that gets close to about 110, I'll be right back. And our water is roughly 110 degrees. It looks like we're a little closer to a little over 110, but that's all right. You do not have to be completely accurate here. 110, 120. if you get up and go make a sandwich and you come back and it's 1:30, you're good. You're just going to have to wait a little longer to pitch the yeast. That's all. So I'm going to take that water, I'm going to dump it in this kettle, and we're going to mix in the sugar. All right, so we have our 5 gallons of water in the kettle. I have my 10 pounds of sugar in it. I give it a really nice stir, and you can see the cloudy around the edges over here. That is sugar that's not quite dissolved yet, so we're going to keep stirring a little bit. And also, you'll notice right here in the very middle, you'll see a dark spot. That's sugar that's pooled up in the bottom. So we're going to mix that up, and then we're going to give it another stir. You can already tell how clear the water is right now. I'm going to let this stop swirling, but I think we're good at this point. Yeah, see, I'm not seeing any of the cloudy around the edges. Remember before, you could see the clouds around the edges. That was a sugar that wasn't melted yet. It's nice and clear. Well, it's kind of a yellowish tinge. I just use regular cane sugar. Regular cane sugar is not white. It's actually an off white. It gives you a yellowish looking water when it's done. So you can notice in the middle down here, see that? We do not have a puddle of sugar in the bottom anymore. So we're good. I'm gonna call this good. We're gonna transfer this over to the fermenter, all right? So I'm gonna move the camera. Let's see if we can do this without getting this in the fermenter. All right? I'll be right back. All right. Right now I need to wait for my temperature to get somewhere between 90 to 100 degrees. See, my temperature right now is 99 degrees. So right now it is technically okay to pitch the yeast. The magic number is 90 degrees. If you don't know the temperature range for your yeast, use 90 degrees. Now, the yeast that I'm using here, I happen to know that the temperature range, the preferred temperature range, the optimal temperature range for this yeast is 85 to 95 degrees. So I'm going to let that cool off just a couple degrees, and then we'll pitch our yeast. But if you pitched your yeast right now, you'll be just fine. To anything between 90 to 100, you're going to be good. All right, so let's check this again. Looks like we're right about 96 degrees. That's close enough for me. Let's go ahead and put some yeast nutrients in this, and then we'll pitch the yeast. I'm going to use 2 heaping tablespoons. And we're going to mix it in real quick. Don't have to get it perfect, you just want to mix it in a little bit so it's not sitting on top when you pitch that yeast. There we go. And to that I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of the Distillimax RM. Any daddy yeast will do. You can use turbo yeast if you want. Turbo yeast has the yeast nutrient built into it as well, so if we're doing something like this, that might be an advantage for you. You can make a yeast starter if you want. But I normally just pitch the yeast right in the mash, or in this case the wash. Mix it up a little bit. Then we're going to install the lid. I do use a little bit of a rubber mallet to make sure I get this lid on nice and tight. And then I'm just going to use one of these real simple little airlocks, about half full of water. That's all there is to it. You just got to let her work, probably 2 weeks, 10 days, something like that. It'll be ready to run. Cheers.